Welcome to a series of lectures on communication skills. In these lectures, we'll be talking about how effective communication can be achieved and whether communication is related to spoken English only, or can it be applied to other mediums as well? We'll also be looking at the problems or barriers in communication, and at the end, give you some tips to improve your communication skills. Now, let us first of all talk about communication myths. Myth number one, that we only communicate when we want to communicate. We can communicate even when we don't want to, but for different reasons, and not necessarily using words. Myth number two, words mean the same both to the speaker and the listener, which is not a fact. Communication can break down if the listener does not catch the entire medium that has been sent by the speaker. Or in other words, if there are distractions, it's quite possible that the listener might not get everything that the speaker wanted to say. Number three, we communicate chiefly with words. The fact is that words are just one way of communicating, what we call verbal communication. But then there is body language, or what we call non-verbal communication. That too plays a greater part in communication skills. Non-verbal communication need not be silent all the way. When we move our body, or when we bring expressions on our face, that need not be every time silent. Communication is not a one-way street. Though you can communicate to many people in one go, but real communication is a two-way street. We talk to somebody and he or she responds to it. And when we communicate any message to the listener can receive the communication in the same way if there are no distortions or distractions. It's very important that the speaker and the listener are at such a distance that both of them interact with each other and both of them listen to one another. Now, another myth is that there is too much information during communication. Depending on a particular situation, we need not be wordy, we need not be heavily informed. We could talk very little words but give a lot of information to them. Therefore, we need to know what are the common ways of communication. Spoken word is the most common and the most frequent way of communicating with others. We can communicate through writing also. Written word, whether it's a book, an article, a letter, or anything that we write that communicates something to the reader. We can communicate through images or visual pictures. We can communicate through our body, what we call body language or non-verbal communication. So these mediums are, all of them are very important in order to understand how communication can be effective. And if you look at the way communication takes place, there is a process involved in it. As I mentioned before, that you need a sender and a receiver. Now their roles can be reversed. Sender can be a recipient and a receiver can be a sender when we communicate to each other. But when both of them communicate, there is an immediate feedback about whether or not a particular bit of information has been understood. So this sender-receiver relationship is very important for communicating effectively. What does the sender send? The sender initiates a thought or a feeling in his mind. He puts that into words, which is called encoding. And once this encoding takes place, it is then transmitted through our mouth to the sender, to the receiver. Now, in the receiver's brain, a similar process takes place. The encoded message is decoded. Now, this encoding and decoding is the language in which a particular bit of information is sent or received. And then that decoded message is in fact assigned some thought or feeling according to the way the sender has sent his or her message. Then the same receiver responds in the same way by encoding his response in the same language in which the sender has sent it, and then the message is sent across. So this recipient and the sender, their roles are very important. That is why communication is not a single way street or a single way communication. In fact, both the sender and the receiver play a very important role in communication, and it's very important that this process takes place without any barriers, without any disturbance, without any distraction. And when communication fails, or when the sender's message does not reach the receiver, we say that it gets distorted. And this distortion does not help the sender and the receiver in any way, because the message is not sent across by either of them. There is no sender, there is no receiver who are able to understand each other or communicate with each other. As you can see, this distortion can be caused by different things. It's not just the sender is sending his message and the receiver is receiving it and there is a way of not understanding each other. No. In fact, when the sender or the recipient fail to understand each other, that they could be caused by several things. Some of them are environmental, some of them are personal, which we'll be talking in a moment. But when most of the time when we talk about the spoken word. That is why analysis or research has shown that in all the communication mediums, 70% communication is either distorted, it is not heard, or it is misinterpreted, or it is misunderstood. Why does this happen? Or what are the things which cause this distraction? In fact, it's very important to know that there are some barriers to effective communication. And these barriers, as I told you before, could be personal. How could these barriers be personal, for example? Personally, as a recipient, I'm not interested in understanding or comprehending what the sender is saying. That causes a distraction. Or I feel that the sender is inferior to me. So I develop a superiority complex or arrogance. That could be another reason. Another reason could be that the message is so wordy, or what we call verbose. There are words and words and words, and I, as a recipient, do not feel at all interested or do not comprehend what exactly the message is all about. Speed is very important in communication. Speed of delivery. If the sender is too fast, words may not reach the receiver. And if the sender is so fast that the words do not make any sense for the receiver, or the speed is so slow that the receiver feels bored. So speed is very important. Misinterpretation, which could be another barrier in effective communication. Misinterpretation occurs when the sender and the receiver do not understand each other, or when the receiver is not able to make any sense to the message which the sender has sent. Another barrier could be preconceived notions. That is, the receiver has somehow in the mind notions about what the sender is going to talk about. He has already some ideas in mind, and he tries to interpret the sender's message through those preconceived ideas or notions, as a result of which he or she is not able to understand each other. Another very important barrier, very significant in fact, could be the physical problems. Physical problems in the sense that the sender and receiver are talking at such a location where effective communication creates a problem or is a problem in itself. For example, there is a lot of noise around them, or there are lots of people around them. They are talking, so are the sender and the receiver, as a result of which they are not able to understand each other. There are other barriers which we'll be talking about in our next lecture. Before we end, let us look at what we have learned so far. We talked about different myths which have been attached to communication. And we try to resolve them by looking at what, in fact, real communication is all about. We also talked about a sender-receiver model where the roles of the sender and receiver, they can be reversed, because when you're talking to each other, sometimes the sender is the listener and sometimes the receiver is the listener. But in any way, communication is a two-way traffic, is a two-way interaction. And what do they do? Both of them. Whether somebody is sending the message or another person is responding to it, both of them put their messages in a coded form, which is the language. And both of them, they encode and then decode and then try to find out what the message is. However, if the message is not understood for one reason or the other, that could happen because of several distortions, and some of them we have talked about, and many of them we would be talking about in our next lecture. Thank you. See you again.